He owned the city skyline, but he couldn't stand the sight of his own wife. Alistair Blackwood, a titan of industry, saw Eleanor as nothing more than a necessary but deeply embarrassing part of a business merger. He called her plain a ghost in his gilded mansion, a wallflower he actively hid from the public eye. But a ghost can still hear. And after one final crushing insult, Eleanor decided the wallflower was about to bloom. She embarked on a secret transformation, preparing for one single night, the Metropolis Charity Gala, to show her husband and the world exactly who they had underestimated. Alistair Blackwood didn't marry a woman. He'd acquired a final critical asset. Eleanor Vance was the biological key to the successful merger between Blackwood Industries and Vance Pharmaceuticals, a deal brokered by their fathers on a golf course years before either of them had a say in the matter. The agreement was ironclad. The union of their companies would be sealed by the union of their children. Alistair got controlling shares of a pharmaceutical empire, and Eleanor got the Blackwood name and a cage, albeit a gilded one. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum of Alistair's success. It was a cold expanse of marble, glass, and steel, with panoramic views of a city that worshipped him. And in this sprawling testament to his power, Eleanor was the ghost. She was quiet, unobtrusive, and in Alistair's cutting opinion, painfully plain. She had intelligent hazel eyes that saw everything, but she kept them downcast. Her mousy brown hair was often pulled back in a simple severe bun, and her wardrobe consisted of a rotation of beige-grey and navy cardigans and sensible skirts that seemed designed to make her fade into the expensive wallpaper. Alistair was a man carved from ambition and arrogance, with sharp, dark features, a physique honed by personal trainers, and a collection of Savile Row suits. He commanded attention wherever he went. He thrived in the spotlight, his name a constant presence in the pages of Forbes and Vogue. His wife, however, was his secret shame. In the 3 years of their marriage, he had never willingly taken her to a major public event. On the rare occasions her presence was unavoidable, he would introduce her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is Eleanor," before immediately turning his attention to someone more important, more beautiful, more interesting. The mockery wasn't always so public. More often, it was a daily series of small, sharp cuts. "For God's sake, Eleanor, are you wearing that again?" He'd sneer as she came down for breakfast, her simple grey dress a stark contrast to his immaculate Tom Ford suit. "You have a black card with no limit. Try to look like you're married to me, not my bookkeeper." She would just murmur a quiet, "I'm comfortable, Alistair," which only seemed to infuriate him further. "Comfort is the luxury of people who don't have to be looked at," he'd retort, not even glancing up from his tablet. His cruelty was casual, a thoughtless byproduct of his immense ego. He never considered her feelings, because to him, she was not a complete person. She was a contractual obligation, a piece of living furniture. He had no idea that she had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, with a degree in finance, that she could speak 3 languages fluently, or that she found solace in reading Russian literature in its original text late at night when the cavernous penthouse was silent. He never asked. The upcoming Metropolis Charity Gala was the apex of New York's social calendar, an event Alistair considered his personal stage. This year, the Blackwood Industries name was the lead sponsor. His attendance was non-negotiable, and to his profound irritation, so was his wife's. Board members, particularly the older, more traditional ones from the Vance side, had been making comments about her absence at previous functions. It looked bad. It looked to be specific, like there was trouble in the perfect billionaire's marriage. He brought it up one evening, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. "The gala is on the 1st of next month. You'll be coming with me." Eleanor looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. "Oh, I wasn't aware." "Well, you are now," he said sharply. "My PR team thinks it's imperative we present a united front." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I've had my assistant contact a stylist. Her name is Celine. She'll be here tomorrow at 10. For the love of God, listen to her. Don't argue. Just let her turn you into something presentable." He didn't see the flicker of pain in her hazel eyes. Or perhaps he did, and simply didn't care. To him, this was a problem to be managed. His plain wife needed to be polished up like a dull piece of silver before she could be put on display. "Of course, Alistair," she said, her voice a soft whisper that was easily swallowed by the vastness of the room. He gave a curt nod, satisfied. He drained his scotch and walked out of the room without another word, leaving her alone with the city lights and the weight of his casual disdain. Eleanor closed her book, the words on the page blurring. She walked to the window, looking down at the endless stream of bright, bustling lights. Everyone down there was living a life full of choices and feelings and heartbreaks and joys. She was up here higher than all of them, in a silent, sterile palace, more isolated than any of them could ever imagine. For 3 years, she had endured. For 3 years, she had made herself small and invisible, hoping that if she didn't draw attention, she could at least find peace. But his demand that she be made presentable was not just an insult. It was a command to be a dollar prop on his arm for one night. He didn't want her. He wanted a sanitized, approved version of her. And as she stared at her faint reflection in the glass, a quiet, cold resolve began to form in the depths of her heart. He wanted something presentable. Fine, he would get it. But it wouldn't be on his terms. It would be on hers. The stylist Celine arrived precisely at 10 the next morning. She was a chic, bird-like woman, with a severe black bob and an air of professional impatience. She assessed Eleanor with a critical eye, walking a slow circle around her, as if inspecting a piece of unremarkable livestock. "Well," Celine began, her French accent sharp, "we have a canvas, a very blank canvas." She gestured for her assistants to bring in racks of glittering gowns in jewel tones, fabrics that shimmered and flowed like liquid metal. For hours, Eleanor was poked, prodded, and pushed into dresses that felt like costumes. Each one was a testament to Alistair's taste, loud, expensive, and designed to scream trophy. There was a crimson dress with a plunging neckline, a gold sequined number that was blindingly bright, and a sapphire blue gown that felt heavy and suffocating. "Mr. Blackwood specified he wants something that makes a statement," Celine said, yanking a zipper. "He wants you to look vibrant." Eleanor knew what he meant. He wanted her to look like the women he was usually seen with, models and actresses who were as dazzling and disposable as champagne flutes. She felt like an imposter in her own skin, the beautiful clothes only serving to highlight how much she wasn't the woman who was supposed to wear them. Later that week, the final straw landed. It wasn't a direct blow, but a glancing one, overheard, and all the more painful for it. Alistair was hosting an informal business dinner in their private dining room. Eleanor, as usual, had made herself scarce, retreating to the library that adjoined the space. The heavy oak doors were nearly closed, but a small gap remained, and the voices lubricated by expensive wine carried. She heard the booming laugh of Julian Croft, Alistair's primary business rival. Croft was everything Alistair was, but with a veneer of old money charm, that Alistair's new money aggression could never replicate. Their rivalry was legendary in New York's financial circles. "I have to say, Alistair," Croft's smooth voice drifted through the door, "you've played the long game brilliantly. Locking down Vance Farmer was a masterstroke. Pity about the attachments." Alistair's friends chuckled. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She knew they were talking about her. "She's a means to an end, Julian. Nothing more." Alistair's voice was slick with condescension. He was performing for his audience. "The agreement stands. The woman is useful for maintaining the family connection with the board. But let's be honest, she's an eyesore, an absolute zero in the charisma department. Keeping her out of the spotlight is a full-time job." Someone else chimed in. "Come on, Alistair. You could have at least married one with a bit of spark." "The packaging was irrelevant," Alistair shot back, and the finality in his tone was like a slap. "I bought the company, not the wrapping paper. As long as she stays quiet and doesn't embarrass me, she's fulfilling her side of the bargain." The laughter that followed was a physical blow. Eleanor shrank back from the door, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle a gasp. An eyesore. The wrapping paper. He hadn't just said it to her in a moment of anger. He had said it to his rival, to his friends, as a point of pride. He was boasting about how little she meant to him. In that moment, something inside her didn't just break. It shattered, and the pieces began to reassemble themselves into something new, something hard and sharp. The quiet acceptance she had cultivated for 3 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear fury. She had been a ghost in his house, a footnote in his life, a contractual obligation he barely tolerated. No more. She backed away from the door silently, her movements graceful and sure. She went to her bedroom, the one at the opposite end of the penthouse from Alistair's, and sat at her antique writing desk. She unlocked a small hidden drawer and pulled out a worn leather-bound address book. It had belonged to her mother, a woman who before her illness had been a force of nature, brilliant, stylish, and unapologetically herself. Eleanor flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the elegant, faded script, until she found the name she was looking for. Isabella Rossi, Rome. Isabella had been her mother's closest confidant, a legendary figure whispered about in the highest echelons of European society. She wasn't just a stylist. She was a sculptor of personas, an artist who worked not in clay or stone, but in confidence, posture, and presence. She had retired years ago, disappearing from the public eye to live a secluded life in Italy, refusing all clients. Eleanor picked up her phone. She didn't hesitate. She knew it was a long shot, but the fire Alistair had just ignited in her gut was burning too brightly to be ignored. She would not be presentable. She would not be a doll dressed by his stylist. She would be a masterpiece of her own making. The phone rang for a long time before a husky, accented voice answered. Pronto. Eleanor took a deep breath, the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Isabella, she said, her voice steady and clear, devoid of its usual whisper. This is Eleanor Vance. I'm Catherine Vance's daughter. I need your help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor could hear the faint sound of cicadas, a world away from the sterile quiet of her penthouse. Catherine's girl. Isabella Rossi's voice was a low, smoky rasp, like aged whiskey. I haven't heard that name in years. I am retired Cara. I know, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. I wouldn't call if it weren't important. It's not about a dress. It's about... and resurrection. Another pause. Isabella was intrigued. Resurrection. That is a very big word. He called me wrapping paper. Eleanor said the words tasting like ash. He said I was an eyesore he had to hide. He's going to parade me out at the Metropolis Gala, and he expects me to be his quiet, plain little accessory. I refuse. The cicadas buzzed. Then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. Ah, a man. It is always a man. Your mother, she would have burned his entire world to the ground for saying such a thing. You have her fire in you, I think. It is just sleeping. Very well, little bird. Let's see if we can teach you how to roar. I will be in New York in 2 days. Cancel this, Celine. We have work to do. The line went dead. Eleanor felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. The game had just changed. The next day she dismissed a bewildered Celine, telling her simply that her services were no longer required. She then informed Alistair that she would be handling her own arrangements for the gala. He barely looked up from his desk. Fine, just don't show up in one of your grey cardigans. I'll be mortified enough as it is. He was so secure in his perception of her that he couldn't fathom her doing anything of consequence. His dismissal was the perfect cover. Isabella Rossi was not what Eleanor expected. She wasn't a whirlwind of air kisses and fashion jargon. She was a woman in her late 60s with piercing dark eyes, a mane of silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, and an aura of absolute authority. She arrived at the service entrance with a single suitcase and surveyed the penthouse with a look of profound disdain. "This place has no soul," she declared. "It is a bank vault with a view. No wonder you are hiding." Their work began not in a closet, but in Eleanor's mind. For the first few days, they didn't look at a single item of clothing. They talked. Isabella had Eleanor tell her everything about her childhood, her love for numbers and literature, her forgotten ambitions, the slow, crushing weight of her marriage. Isabella listened, her gaze never wavering, dissecting every word, every hesitation. "You have made yourself invisible as a shield," Isabella concluded one afternoon, as they sat in the rarely used sunroom. "You think if they cannot see you, they cannot hurt you. But a shield can also be a cage, Eleanor. You have locked yourself inside." The training was rigorous and holistic. Isabella was a drill sergeant in Dior. They started with posture. Shoulders back. Your ancestors were not invertebrates tall. Walk as if you own the ground beneath you, not as if you are apologizing for taking up space. Eleanor spent hours walking back and forth in the long hallway, a stack of books on her head, until her tentative shuffle transformed into a graceful, confident stride. Next came her voice. Isabella made her read poetry aloud, projecting from her diaphragm. "Your voice is a whisper. A whisper is for secrets and prayers, not for the boardroom or the ballroom. Speak as if you expect to be heard." Her soft murmurs slowly gained timbre and strength, becoming measured and clear. Isabella also scrutinized her habits. "Stop hiding behind your hair. Stop looking at the floor. Eye contact is not a challenge. It is a conversation. Let them see the intelligence in your eyes. It will frighten the weak and impress the strong." While Isabella was remodeling her presence, Eleanor was secretly rebuilding her independence. Years ago, she had inherited a modest but respectable stock portfolio from her grandmother. Alistair, after a cursory glance, had dismissed it as pocket money and forgotten all about it. But Eleanor, with her Wharton education and an untapped, brilliant financial mind, had been managing it meticulously. In the privacy of her study late at night, she wasn't just reading Tolstoy. She was analyzing market trends, making daring, calculated investments in tech startups and emerging biotech firms. Her pocket money had quietly grown into a substantial fortune, a secret nest egg that gave her a burgeoning sense of power. It was her escape plan long before she knew she was planning an escape. Finally, a week before the gala, Isabella addressed the wrapping paper. She didn't bring in racks of dresses. Instead, she and Eleanor collaborated. They didn't look at trends, they looked for a statement. "This is not about being beautiful," Isabella explained, sketching designs in a notebook. "Alistair is surrounded by beauty. It is common. It is cheap. This is about being unforgettable. We will create an enigma. When you walk into that room, they should not say, 'She is beautiful.' They should say, 'Who is that?'" They commissioned a gown from a reclusive avant-garde designer in Antwerp, whose work was closer to art than fashion. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light, structured with architectural precision, but flowing with an ethereal grace. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly unique. It was a dress that did not wear the woman. The woman had to inhabit it. The physical transformation was the final piece. A top hairstylist sworn to secrecy was flown in from Paris. He cut her mousy brown hair, layered it to frame her face, and dyed it a rich, warm chestnut with subtle glints of auburn. A makeup artist, a legend in the editorial world, showed her how to accentuate her high cheekbones and define her large, intelligent hazel eyes, making them the arresting focal point of her face. On the afternoon of the gala, Eleanor looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger, but also, paradoxically, the most honest version of herself she had ever seen. The plainness was gone, stripped away to reveal the strength that had been there all along. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, cool determination. Isabella stood behind her, a rare, proud smile on her face. "There you are, Cara," she said softly. "I was wondering when you would show up." Eleanor smiled back, a true, confident smile that reached her eyes. "Alistair is expecting a wallflower," she said, her voice low and resonant. "He's about to get a forest fire." The Metropolis Charity Gala was an exercise in ostentatious grandeur. The entrance to the Museum of Modern Art was a river of flashing camera bulbs and velvet ropes. Luxury cars pulled up one after another, depositing the city's elite onto a red carpet that snaked past a throng of reporters and onlookers. Alistair Blackwood arrived early and alone. He thrived in this environment, moving through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark. He wore a custom Brioni tuxedo, the dark fabric a perfect foil for his ruthless ambition. He glad-handed politicians, exchanged barbed pleasantries with business rivals, and posed for the cameras with an easy, practiced smile. He was in his element. Several people asked about his wife. "Where's Eleanor tonight, Alistair?" asked a portly banking CEO. Alistair gave a theatrical, dismissive sigh. "Oh, you know Eleanor. She's probably still deciding which shade of beige to wear. She'll be along. Don't worry, I've had her thoroughly. Styled. She might even be recognizable tonight." He winked, and the men around him shared a knowing chuckle. He felt a familiar pang of irritation. He just hoped she wouldn't do anything to actively embarrass him. He secured a glass of champagne and positioned himself near the grand staircase, the main entry point to the ballroom where he could hold court. He was deep in a conversation with Julian Croft. Their talk, a polite dance of veiled insults and power plays, when a sudden hush fell over the usually clamorous foyer. It wasn't an abrupt silence, but a spreading wave of quiet as conversations faltered and heads began to turn one by one toward the entrance. A ripple of whispers followed. Alistair, annoyed by the interruption, glanced impatiently toward the staircase. And then he saw her. For a moment his brain simply refused to process the image. He saw a woman descending the grand marble staircase, and his first thought was that she must be a movie star, or perhaps European royalty he hadn't been briefed on. She moved with a liquid grace, her hand gliding lightly over the balustrade. The gown, a breathtaking creation of midnight blue silk, seemed to absorb the light around her, creating an aura of mystery and power. It wasn't revealing yet. It clung to a figure that was surprisingly slender and strong. Her rich chestnut hair caught the light, framing a face with sculpted cheekbones and a determined yet serene expression. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were large, intelligent, and scanning the crowd with an unhurried, confident gaze. There was no timidity, no apology in them. They held a silent, formidable power. Alistair felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He squinted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. There was something about the line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. Julian Croft, standing beside him, let out a low whistle. "My God," he murmured, his usual cynical mask falling away for a second. "Now that is a woman. Who is she?" The woman reached the bottom of the staircase. The cameras, which had been focused on a famous actress, swung toward her in a frantic, unified motion, the sound of shutters clicking like a hailstorm. She didn't flinch. She didn't pose. She simply paused, her eyes continuing their calm survey of the room. And then her gaze landed on Alistair. She held his eyes for a single, charged second. A ghost of a smile, enigmatic and cool, touched her lips. It was in that smile that Alistair's world tilted on its axis. The recognition crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. The air left his lungs. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly heavy, alien. It was Eleanor. It was his wife. His plain, invisible, beige wife. But it couldn't be. The woman standing before him was a goddess, a queen. She carried herself with an authority he had never seen. The mousy hair was gone, the dowdy clothes were gone, the downcast eyes and the apologetic posture were gone. Every trace of the woman he had so casually mocked and dismissed had been annihilated. In her place stood this breathtaking stranger who wore his wife's face. "Alistair, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Julian Croft said, a note of amusement in his voice. He followed Alistair's stunned gaze, and his eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Wait a minute, is that Eleanor?" Alistair couldn't answer. He was completely, utterly speechless. His mouth was dry, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a strange, terrifying new emotion, awe. He watched frozen as several of the city's most powerful men he had been trying to impress all night, began to move toward her. Their expressions a mixture of admiration and intense curiosity. She greeted them with a quiet nod and a warm yet reserved smile. Her voice when she spoke was not the whisper he was used to, but a low, melodious tone that carried easily. He had wanted her to be presentable. He had wanted her to be an accessory. But this was not an accessory. This was a supernova. And she hadn't just entered the room. She had taken it. The rest of the evening unfolded like a fever dream for Alistair. He felt as though he had been relegated to the role of a spectator at his own event, watching a drama he didn't understand, starring a woman he thought he knew. He saw his wife, this new, unbelievable Eleanor, move through the gala's glittering crowd, not with the timid uncertainty he expected, but with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. Before he could recover from his initial shock and cross the floor to her. She was intercepted by Julian Croft. Alistair watched his jaw tight as his chief rival took Eleanor's hand, bowing slightly to kiss her knuckles in a gesture of old-world gallantry. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "I must confess I almost didn't recognize you. You are absolutely magnificent." Alistair expected Eleanor to blush, to stammer, to shrink under the attention. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully. "Thank you, Julian. It's amazing what a change in perspective can do." Her reply was smooth, witty, and held a subtle double meaning that was clearly not lost on Croft, who laughed in appreciation. Alistair started towards them, a possessive, primal instinct kicking in. This was his wife. What was Croft doing? But as he approached, Eleanor turned to greet Marcus Thorne, the notoriously reclusive tech billionaire. Alistair had been trying to get a meeting with Thorne for months. Now here was his wife talking to him as if they were old friends. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I was fascinated by your company's recent acquisition of the AI logistics firm Omnicorp. Their predictive modeling is revolutionary, but I imagine the real challenge will be integrating their volatile code base with your existing infrastructure." Thorne, a man who famously despised small talk, looked at her with genuine surprise and interest. "You follow AI logistics. I follow smart investments," Eleanor replied smoothly. "And that was one of the smartest I've seen all year." Alistair stopped dead in his tracks. He had no idea she even knew what AI logistics were. He watched dumbfounded as she and Thorne engaged in an animated technical conversation, Thorne nodding enthusiastically. The power brokers and socialites around them were drawn into her orbit, not just by her stunning appearance, but by the palpable intelligence and confidence she radiated. He felt a hot surge of something ugly and unfamiliar jealousy. It was quickly followed by an even more unsettling feeling he was irrelevant to her. She wasn't looking for him, didn't seem to need his validation or his presence. She was building her own connections, commanding her own spotlight. Finally, he managed to corner her near the terrace. "Eleanor," he said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "What is all this? What did you do to yourself?" She turned to face him, her hazel eyes cool and direct. The look in them was not of a wife greeting her husband, but of a stranger assessing an obstacle. "I decided to wear something other than beige, Alistair. I thought you'd be pleased." "Pleased? This is a costume. A ridiculous stunt," he hissed, trying to regain control. He reached for her arm, his old habit of physically directing her kicking in. She moved back half a step, just enough to make his hand fall into empty space. The rejection was subtle, but absolute. "Is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or is it possible that the woman you've been living with for 3 years was the costume, and this is the first time you're seeing the real me?" He was floored. He had no response. He was used to her complaints, her silence. This cool, articulate defiance was completely disarming. "People are staring," he grumbled, trying a different tactic. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" She glanced around the ballroom. "The only person I see making a scene, Alistair, is you. Everyone else seems to be having a lovely time." She gave him another one of those small, enigmatic smiles. "Now, if you'll excuse me, the curator of the Guggenheim wants to discuss a potential endowment. I believe he's a friend of my father's." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone and exposed. The Emperor had no clothes, and for the first time in his life, Alistair Blackwood felt foolish. He had spent years mocking the quiet woman by his side, all while a queen lay dormant. Tonight she had awakened, and in doing so, she had completely rewritten the rules of their world. He was no longer the sun around which she orbited. He was just another planet, suddenly knocked off his axis, watching her blaze her own path across the sky. The fear that had been a spark was now a raging fire. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had lost something he never even knew he had. The gala was a public execution of Alistair's ego. The following days were the slow, agonizing post-mortem. The city was buzzing, but not about him or his company's sponsorship. They were buzzing about Eleanor Blackwood. The society pages, which had never once featured her, were now filled with breathless descriptions of the mystery woman who had captivated the Metropolis Gala. Photos of her were everywhere, cool, poised, and devastatingly elegant. They called her transformation miraculous, stunning, the debut of the decade. For Alistair, each headline was another twist of the knife. He returned to the penthouse after the gala expecting. He didn't know what. A confrontation. An explanation. Instead, he found nothing. Eleanor's room was quiet. The door closed. The next morning, she was gone before he woke. A brief, formal note was left on the kitchen's marble island. "I will be staying at my mother's old city apartment for a while. My assistant will coordinate with yours if anything is required." The cold fury that rose in him was a defense mechanism against the deeper, more terrifying feeling of utter confusion. This was not the woman he married. This was not the deal he'd made. He had to understand. He treated the problem like any business threat. He launched an investigation. His first call was to David Chen, his discreet and ruthlessly efficient head of security. "I want to know everything Eleanor has been doing for the past 6 months, Alistair ordered, pacing his office high above the city. "Every meeting, every phone call, every credit card transaction. I want to know who was behind this circus." David, a man accustomed to digging up corporate espionage secrets and vetting billion-dollar deals, was momentarily taken aback. "Sir, on Mrs. Blackwood." "You heard me, David. Everything. And I want the name of the stylist who created that dress." The first report landed on his desk within 48 hours, and it only deepened the mystery. There was no stylist on record. The gown had been commissioned directly from a designer in Antwerp, paid for from a private bank account Alistair didn't recognize. The hair and makeup artists were freelancers who had signed ironclad NDAs, but one name appeared with intriguing frequency: Isabella Rossi, the legendary image consultant who had vanished from public life a decade ago. Phone records showed multiple calls between Eleanor and a private number in Rome, followed by flight records showing Isabella arriving in New York 3 weeks before the gala. Alistair stared at the name. Isabella Rossi wasn't a stylist you hired. She was a kingmaker, a woman who only worked with world leaders and cultural icons. How in God's name did Eleanor even get a meeting with her? The financial report was even more shocking. David had managed to trace the bank account the gown was paid from. It was part of a private brokerage account under Eleanor's maiden name, Vance, an account Alistair had dismissed years ago. He pulled up the portfolio, his access as her husband, giving him the authority he needed, and his breath hitched. It wasn't pocket money. It was a fortune. The initial inheritance of a few million had been cultivated with breathtaking skill. She had invested early in obscure tech firms that had since exploded. She had shorted a failing retail giant months before its public collapse. She had diversified into green energy and pharmaceuticals with the foresight of a seasoned Wall Street predator. Her portfolio had grown exponentially now, rivaling the net worth of some of the men he considered his peers. She was in her own right independently and staggerably wealthy. He felt a wave of vertigo. He had been calling her a bookkeeper while she was quietly playing the market like a virtuoso. He had lectured her about his unlimited black card while she was amassing a fortune he hadn't even known existed. The power dynamic he had taken for granted was a complete fiction. She didn't need him. She hadn't needed him for a very long time. Driven by a new, desperate need for answers, Alistair did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He investigated her past. He called a contact. He had an old-school private investigator named Finn, and asked him to dig into the Vance family, specifically into Eleanor's life before their marriage. The story Finn pieced together was a quiet tragedy. The Vances had once been more than just wealthy. They were socially prominent. But when Eleanor was in her late teens, her father had been embroiled in a nasty, high-profile insider trading scandal. Though he was eventually exonerated, the media frenzy was merciless. They hounded the family with paparazzi camping outside their estate. A particularly aggressive photographer had caused a car accident that badly injured her mother, Catherine, an injury from which she never fully recovered, leading to a reliance on the painkillers that would eventually contribute to her early death. The trauma had changed Eleanor profoundly. She had been bright, vibrant, and on the cusp of a brilliant career. But the predatory nature of the public eye, the way their family was torn apart for sport, had driven her into hiding. Her plainness, her quietness, her invisibility. It wasn't her nature. It was a fortress. She had deliberately built a shell around herself, a defense mechanism to ensure no one would ever look at her, judge her, or hurt her again. Alistair put the phone down, the investigator's words echoing in the silent office. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He hadn't just mocked her for being plain. He had mocked her for her armor. He had belittled the very walls she had built to protect herself from the kind of brutal public world he reveled in. He had been the monster she was hiding from, and he had been living in her house. His phone buzzed. It was an alert from his legal department. Julian Croft's company, Croft Consolidated, had just submitted a formal proposal for a joint venture. It wasn't addressed to Blackwood Industries. It was a multi-billion-dollar green energy initiative, and the proposal was addressed directly to Ms. Eleanor Vance, CEO of EV Capital, the official name of her private investment firm. Croft hadn't just admired her at the gala. He had recognized her power, and now he was treating her as an equal, a formidable player in a game Alistair thought he owned. The last piece of his superiority crumbled into dust. Armed with the devastating truth of his own ignorance, Alistair knew he couldn't let this play out through assistants and lawyers. He drove himself to the address on Eleanor's note, a classic, elegant brownstone in the West Village that felt a world away from the cold modernity of their penthouse. It felt like her understated solid and possessing a quiet, hidden strength. She opened the door herself. She was not wearing a gown or expertly applied makeup. She was in simple black trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. Yet the timid woman was gone forever. The confidence she had worn at the gala was still there now, a quiet, unshakable core of her being. She looked at him not with anger, but with a calm, appraising distance. "Alistair," she said, her voice even. "I wasn't expecting you." "Can I come in?" he asked. The words felt foreign, humble. He had never asked for permission to enter a room in his own home. She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. The apartment was filled with books, warm wood, and comfortable furniture. It was a home, not a showroom. It was her. He didn't know where to start. The arrogance that had been his default setting for his entire life had deserted him. "The gala," he began, his voice hoarse. "Eleanor, You were speechless," she finished for him, a wry, sad smile on her lips. "That was the point. For one night, I wanted you to see me. To really see me." "I was a fool," he said, the admission costing him more than any failed business deal ever had. "A cruel, blind fool. I read the reports, Eleanor, about your finances, about your family, about what happened to your mother." Her calm expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of old pain in her eyes. "You had me investigated." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I had to understand," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I had to know who the woman I married really was. The things I said to you, the way I treated you. I called your shield a weakness because I was too arrogant to see it for what it was. I'm so sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. It was genuine, wrenched from a place of profound shame. Eleanor listened, her gaze steady. She walked over to a small mahogany desk and picked up a thick manila envelope. She held it out to him. "I'm sorry too, Alistair," she said softly. "I'm sorry I allowed myself to be invisible for so long. I'm sorry I let my fear dictate my life. I'm sorry that our marriage was nothing more than a cage for both of us." He took the envelope. His fingers felt numb as he opened the flap and saw the legal letterhead. Divorce papers. His heart plummeted. "No," he whispered. "Eleanor, don't. I see you now. I swear to God I see you. Let's start over. Let me get to know the real you. The woman who can captivate a ballroom and outsmart Wall Street. Let me earn a place in your life." She shook her head, not with malice, but with a gentle finality. "This isn't a punishment, Alistair, and it's not a negotiating tactic. It's a statement. I am no longer the woman who signed that marriage contract. That Eleanor Vance is gone. I spent 3 years in your shadow, and I'm finally ready to stand in my own sun." He looked at the papers, then back at her face, truly seeing the intelligence, strength, and resilience etched there. He had possessed a diamond and had treated it like a common stone, only realizing its value when it was no longer his. The irony was crushing. The master of acquisitions had failed the most important merger of his life. "Is there no chance?" he asked, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that shocked them both. "The old me would have been afraid to leave," she said, her voice filled with a newfound peace. "The new me is afraid not to. I have a business to run. Julian Croft just proposed a very interesting joint venture." She allowed a small, confident smile. "I have a life to build. My own life." She didn't ask him to leave, but he knew it was time to go. He stood there for a moment longer, the divorce papers a dead weight in his hand, memorizing the face of the incredible woman he had so carelessly thrown away. He had wanted to leave her speechless, but in the end, she had been the one to silence him, not with address, but with her quiet, unassailable strength. He walked out of her home and back into the city, a city that suddenly felt like it belonged more to her than to him. The story wasn't over. He knew that. But for the first time, he was not the one writing it. Eleanor Vance Blackwood. No. Eleanor Vance was holding the pen, and her first chapter was just beginning. 6 months passed. The seasons in New York turned, But the shift in the city's power structure was more dramatic than the changing leaves in Central Park. The name Blackwood still commanded respect in boardrooms, but the name Vance now elicited something more potent intrigue. Eleanor did not move back into the gilded cage on Park Avenue. The divorce was finalized with a quiet efficiency that was characteristic of her new life. There were no messy tabloid battles or public recriminations. Eleanor's terms were simple. She wanted nothing from Alistair's fortune. She wanted only a clean separation, leaving her free to continue building her own. This act, more than anything else, cemented her status as a figure of immense and independent strength in the eyes of the public and the financial world. Her firm EV Capital moved into a sleek office in the newly developed Hudson Yards, a space of light glass and forward-thinking design. It was the architectural opposite of Alistair's opulent, heavy penthouse. Here, she thrived. The green energy venture with Julian Croft, dubbed Helios, was a resounding success. They were acquiring land-breaking ground and attracting investors who were drawn not only to the project's profitability, but to Eleanor's formidable reputation for meticulous research and ethical investing. Her partnership with Julian was one of deep intellectual respect. He was a shrewd businessman, but he found himself consistently impressed by her ability to see angles he had missed, to calculate risks with a calm precision that bordered on prophetic. Their meetings were a rapid-fire exchange of ideas, data, and strategy. Helios is stable, but we need to diversify our Q4 acquisitions, Eleanor stated one afternoon, standing before a digital chart in the conference room. The geopolitical climate is too unstable to rely solely on solar. I'm looking at a company in Finland, specializing in geothermal capture. Their tech is 10 years ahead of the curve. Julian leaned back in his chair, a genuinely impressed smile on his face. Finland. Of course. While everyone else is looking at the desert, you're looking under the ice. You never cease to amaze me, Eleanor. It's just about seeing the whole board, Julian, she replied, her confidence natural and unassuming. There was no flirtation between them, no hint of the romance the gossip columnists desperately wanted to invent. Theirs was a connection forged in the crucible of ambition and mutual brilliance. It was, in its own way, more intimate and far more powerful than a simple romance. Meanwhile, Alistair Blackwood was living in the echo of his former life. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like a mausoleum. The silence was immense. He had tried to fill it at first, hosting parties and bringing home the kind of beautiful, vapid women he had once preferred. But he found their conversation empty, their laughter grating. They were not her. They lacked the depth, the hidden fire, the quiet intelligence he had been blind to for so long and now craved with a desperate ache. He saw her, of course. It was impossible not to. He saw her on the cover of Forbes, profiled as the quiet titan of Wall Street. He saw paparazzi photos of her leaving a conference in Geneva, looking effortlessly chic in a tailored pantsuit. Her expression focused and serene. He saw her being interviewed on financial news networks, speaking with an eloquence and authority that made his heart clench with a mixture of pride and profound loss. One evening he was watching from his car stuck in traffic on Fifth Avenue. A digital billboard above him lit up. It was an ad for the Helios Initiative. It showed a pristine image of a wind farm at sunrise, and across the bottom, the corporate logos Croft Consolidated and EV Capital. Her name illuminated 20 feet high. His rival and his ex-wife building the future together. He finally understood. He had spent his life acquiring things, companies, buildings, assets. He had treated Eleanor like his ultimate acquisition, and in his arrogance, he had never bothered to look inside the wrapping paper. He had owned a treasure and let it slip through his fingers because he was too foolish to recognize its worth. His phone buzzed. It was his father. "Alistair," the old man's gruff voice said, "I see your ex-wife is making waves. Perhaps you should have paid more attention to what you had." The line went dead. The criticism from the one man whose approval he'd always sought was the final crushing blow. Alistair looked from the billboard, from her name in lights, to his own reflection in the polished window of his limousine. He saw a man who had everything and nothing. He had the money, the power, the skyline. But he was utterly, completely alone. Miles away in her own office, Eleanor stood by the window looking out at the same city. She didn't see a collection of buildings he owned. She saw a network of opportunities, a future she was building on her own terms. The past 3 years had been a quiet, painful winter. But now it was spring, and everything was beginning to grow. She took a sip of her tea, a small, genuine smile on her face, and turned back to her work. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. But in her world, it felt like the dawn. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say, and that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the changes you inspire. She transformed not just her appearance, but her destiny, proving that self-worth is the most breathtaking accessory of all. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember that she was always a queen. If her journey from being a ghost in a gilded cage to the master of her own empire moved you, please let us know by hitting that like button. What part of her transformation did you find most powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more unforgettable stories of resilience and redemption, don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for listening. They say every marriage holds secrets, but Lillian Westfield never imagined hers would nearly destroy her, especially while carrying her first child. Married to billionaire investor Christian Westfield, she believed her love story resembled a fairy tale, lavish galas, private jets, a mansion overlooking Central Park. But beneath the glittering surface brewed a betrayal so brazen it arrived with a financial invoice. The audacity. It wasn't from her husband. A mysterious woman sent Lillian a bill for services provided itemized with shocking demands. Stunned and pregnant, Lillian refused to be a victim. Instead, she crafted divorce terms so powerful they rocked New York's elite to its core. Lillian Westfield first met Christian Westfield at an auction for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The year was 2015. The moment she spotted his dark, tailored suit and confident stride, she felt a jolt, a mixture of caution and attraction. She had grown up hearing about powerful men from her father, a former advisor at Goldman Sachs, who used to remind her that wealth can be as ruthless as it is glamorous. Yet Christian's charm disarmed her. He didn't just seem wealthy. He seemed genuinely passionate about the arts, about philanthropy, about living a life of meaning. At first glance, their life together looked plucked from a storybook. They traveled to Europe every summer, explored hidden architectural gems, and built a philanthropic foundation aimed at supporting children's education in underdeveloped regions. Lillian, an accomplished interior designer, had her own thriving business, establishing herself as the go-to decorator for boutique hotels in Manhattan. As a power couple, they often shared front-page features in lifestyle magazines. Their townhouse near Central Park boasted a marble foyer, stained glass skylight, and an elevator that glided through 5 floors of meticulously designed spaces. They hosted charity balls complete with celebrity guest lists that included people like philanthropist Bill Gates and actress Emma Watson, raising millions for causes dear to them. The public saw them as unstoppable, the epitome of a modern altruistic duo, beautiful, brilliant, and generous. Behind the scenes, though, it wasn't all gleam. The seeds of resentment had begun to sprout the moment Christian's hedge fund soared to new heights. As his business empire expanded, so did his ego. Meetings late into the night, lavish parties with potential investors, and whispered phone calls started to erode the closeness they once cherished. Lillian sensed shifts in Christian's behavior, unexplained getaways, dinner cancellations, fleeting messages on his phone that he'd quickly hide. But Lillian believed in second chances in conversation over confrontation. She also believed that life was cyclical. Times of closeness and distance came in waves. Unaware that a storm of betrayal was brewing just beyond her horizon, Lillian tried to keep her trust intact, focusing on her interior design projects and the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Lillian grew up in a suburban New Jersey neighborhood, her father Richard O'Donnell serving as a financial consultant for Morgan Stanley. From an early age, she absorbed the language of high finance. Her father would bring home annual reports from clients like Warren Buffett and talk about the power of compound interest. It was also at the dinner table where she first learned about the pitfalls of greed and the price one pays when ambition becomes obsession. By the time she met Christian Westfield at that Met Gala auction, Lillian was already a well-regarded interior designer. She had turned a modest inheritance from her grandmother into a small fortune by flipping undervalued apartments in emerging neighborhoods. Her well-earned confidence and thorough financial knowledge ensured she was never overshadowed by wealthy suitors. Christian's background, meanwhile, was more silver-spooned. Born into old-money aristocracy in Boston, he attended the most prestigious prep schools before heading to Harvard. Yet what set him apart, at least in the beginning, was his ability to empathize. He did not fit the cliché of a spoiled trust fund brat. As Lillian got to know Christian, she found a man who spoke passionately about social responsibility and climate change. He created a hedge fund that, according to him, prioritized ethical investments in renewable energy and technology aimed at improving society. The early days of their courtship were magical. They explored the Met Museum hand in hand, discussing art from the Impressionist era, then grabbed late-night pizza in Queens to keep it real, as Christian liked to say. Sundays were reserved for volunteer work at a soup kitchen, an activity Christian insisted they do to stay connected to the community. When Christian proposed a year later, it was on the steps of the Lincoln Center, following a performance of Swan Lake. The ring was a vintage emerald-cut diamond, a family heirloom passed down from his grandmother. Lillian felt overwhelmed by love and the sense of destiny. "We'll do incredible things together," Christian whispered into her ear. She believed him wholeheartedly. During these early years, Lillian never doubted his sincerity. If Christian needed more hours at the office, she assumed it was for the hedge fund's philanthropic goals. If he was secretive at times, she chalked it up to the demands of client confidentiality. How could she have known that beneath the facade of social consciousness and genuine heart, the seeds of infidelity would eventually take root? Running her own interior design firm had not been easy. Lillian's first big break came when she was approached to redesign the interior of a boutique hotel in Soho. She spent months curating artisanal light fixtures, sourcing reclaimed wood for accent walls, and designing custom furniture that seamlessly blended comfort with minimalist aesthetics. The project earned her a feature in Architectural Digest, catapulting her into Manhattan's elite design circle. Lillian soon expanded her portfolio, taking on high-profile clients. She balanced artistic vision with commercial viability, her skill lying in the ability to interpret her clients' personalities into living spaces. Rich colors and subtle textures became her signature. She believed that a home should tell a story about the people who lived there, one of warmth, openness, and the life experiences they cherished. This philosophy extended into her personal life. Lillian was a giver, always placing others first. She volunteered at local shelters, helped new designers find footing in a competitive industry, and offered internships to promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. She possessed a quiet resilience, never one to broadcast her struggles or triumphs. Instead, she let the results speak for themselves. When she discovered she was pregnant, Lillian's heart brimmed with joy. She envisioned a child who would inherit both her creativity and Christian's passion for social good. She began planning a nursery in soft grays and buttery yellows, set to be the coziest space in their enormous townhouse. But amid her excitement, she noticed the first ripples of tension with Christian. He seemed distracted, his phone always buzzing with calls from work. Occasionally, she would overhear bits of hushed conversations that ended abruptly once she entered the room. Still, she clung to hope. Love, after all, had guided them this far, and she believed people could weather storms if they communicated openly. Little did she know, she was about to receive a wake-up call, a private invoice in the mail, a brazen challenge to her place in Christian's life, and a demand that would shatter her illusions of security. The Westfield Fund. Christian's brainchild was initially small. He invested mostly in tech startups that promised environmental solutions, solar energy, wind turbines, and eco-friendly manufacturing. His success stories included early investments in Tesla and Beyond Meat, which propelled the fund into the spotlight as an example of how ethical investments could also be lucrative. As the fund grew, Christian found himself rubbing shoulders with New York's most prominent financiers. He attended exclusive gatherings at the St. Regis Hotel and private dinners in penthouse suites overlooking the Hudson River. Clients flocked to him, eager to be associated with a fund that claimed to do good for the planet while multiplying returns. Those who studied Christian's ascent closely noticed how everything seemed to accelerate after a lavish weekend in the Hamptons, hosted by none other than Robert Crown, the reclusive oil magnate turned philanthropist. Rumors circulated about who Christian rubbed elbows with that weekend executives from Morgan Stanley. A few tech geniuses and some foreign dignitaries known to hold massive generational wealth. Some friends teased Christian that he was transforming from a philanthropic dreamer into a cutthroat tycoon. He laughed it off, but something undeniably shifted in him. He started wearing bespoke suits from Savile Row, arrived at charity galas in a chauffeur-driven Bentley, and increasingly prized the image of success. It was as though he believed the appearance of virtue was as important, if not more so, than actual virtue. Lillian noticed these changes. In the past, Christian had spoken passionately about supporting impoverished villages in Africa. Now he was too busy managing new deals to attend the foundation meetings. He insisted that a thriving hedge fund would allow them to give more. "We're playing the long game," he'd say, with a charming smile. But after each new infusion of capital, Christian seemed more restless. Phone calls lingered late into the night, often behind closed doors. Lillian could sense an invisible wall erecting between them. When she tried to get his attention mentioning new designs, philanthropic initiatives, even her doctor's appointments, his replies were absent-minded and perfunctory. Despite her growing concerns, she hoped it was a phase. Many men, she reasoned, became workaholics to secure a future for their families. And with her pregnancy, perhaps Christian felt added pressure to expand their wealth. But those suspicions about him, having secrets, whatever they were, gnawed at her a persistent whisper in the back of her mind that refused to be silenced. A few months into her pregnancy, Lillian started noticing anomalies that went beyond mere busyness. On Christian's nights out, supposedly spent with venture capitalists, he would come home with a faint trace of perfume floral notes she had never owned. When Lillian asked about it, he laughed it off. "You know how parties are," he said. "People hug your suit, picks up 1,000 cents. Lillian tried to brush it aside, but more clues surfaced: phone calls at odd hours that Christian would abruptly dismiss as wrong numbers. Suspicious credit card charges at a spa in Midtown on nights he claimed to be at the office, plus the occasional text message from unfamiliar names, women she had never heard of. Christian's excuses stacked up. The tension seeped into every corner of their relationship. Their once lively breakfast chats turned into stiff, polite conversations about schedules and surface matters. No deeper connection, no spontaneous laughter. At times, Christian looked at her belly as though it was both a blessing and a burden. One evening, as Lillian worked late on a new design proposal, she discovered Christian had left his iPad open on the kitchen counter. A message appeared, the preview reading, "Miss me already?" She felt a surge of panic. Before she could unlock the device, Christian swooped in, snatched it, and wore a guarded expression. "Work stuff," he muttered. Lillian's chest tightened. She felt her baby kick as if sensing her anxiety. That same night, she confronted Christian calmly. "If there's something you need to tell me, let's talk. We have a child on the way. We owe it to each other, to be honest," he responded with a dismissive wave. "I'm just stressed, Lillian. Could we not create more drama?" So she stepped back. For the moment, she chose to place her faith in her husband, her unborn child, and the memories of better times. She had no idea her entire world would soon come crashing down, delivered in the form of an elegant envelope addressed to her personally with a price tag attached that would make her blood boil. It happened on a Friday morning. Lillian was in the foyer reviewing design samples when the doorbell rang. Expecting a delivery of custom fabrics, she opened the door to see a courier holding a small stack of envelopes. Among them was a sleek black envelope sealed with a wax stamp, no return address. Something about it radiated importance and mystery. Lillian set the other mail aside and carefully opened the black envelope. Inside was a crisp piece of stationery that read, "Invoice to Mrs. Lillian Westfield. 4 evenings at the Eclipse Spa, 4,500. Shopping spree at Bergdorf. Goodman personal items. $12,000. Fine dining at Le Poème private booth. Chef's tasting, 2,500. Emotional labor and time, as discussed, $50,000. Total $69,000. At the bottom, scrawled in a careful looping handwriting, was a brief note. "Please settle this bill promptly. These luxuries were enjoyed at your husband's request. Tiffany Monroe." For a moment, Lillian stood frozen, unable to comprehend the audacity. A mistress, a woman openly acknowledging her affair with Christian, was invoicing her rage, humiliation, and heartbreak collided in a single, dizzying wave. She dropped the envelope, sank into a chair, and tried to steady her breathing. Her baby fluttered within her, an unsettling reminder of the stakes. Tiffany Monroe. The name was unfamiliar, but Lillian suspected it was the same person behind those suspicious messages on Christian's iPad. How had things escalated to a point where the woman felt confident enough To demand money directly from the wife, Lillian spent the afternoon in a spiral of disbelief and despair. She pressed the invoice against the kitchen table, half tempted to rip it to shreds. Instead, she tried calling Christian. Straight to voicemail. She texted him short and direct. "We need to talk ASAP." Hours passed without a response. By sundown, humiliation gave way to fury. How dare Tiffany treat her like a business partner who simply owed her a cut of Christian's extravagances? How dare Christian remain silent? Lillian began drafting a plan in her head, one that would safeguard her unborn child and ensure that she would never again be at the mercy of anyone's betrayal. The mistress wanted a bill settled. Lillian would respond with something far more drastic: divorce terms that no one in their right mind would dare dismiss. Christian finally walked through the door at around 10 that night, reeking of cologne and exhaustion. Lillian waited in the living room, the black envelope perched ominously on the coffee table. The moment he saw it, his face paled. He tried to mask his panic behind a forced smile, but Lillian's glare told him that no charade would work this time. She held up the invoice. "Want to explain this?" Her voice was low, almost calm, which unnerved Christian more than any outburst would. He stammered, "It's not what you think." But the words rang hollow in the silent room. Christian Lillian said, her voice quivering just enough to betray the emotional storm within. "I've tolerated late-night suspicious phone calls and secrets, but now this woman Tiffany Monroe has crossed a line. She sent me a bill for being your mistress. That's beyond humiliation. That's cruelty." Christian sank into an armchair. For a moment, he covered his face with his hands. When he finally looked up, Lillian saw a glimpse of guilt, overshadowed by desperation. Tiffany. She was an investor contact. One thing led to another. It was a mistake. Lillian held up a hand. "Stop. I don't need every sordid detail." She took a trembling breath. "What I need is respect, honesty, and space to think." He tried to move closer to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Lillian, I love you. I just don't," she said sharply. No more empty words. She pressed a protective hand against her belly. "I have a child to consider, a future that cannot be tied to your lies and your wandering impulses." Christian tried to protest, but Lillian's steely resolve shone in her eyes. She told him she would be meeting with her attorney and that she expected his cooperation in a formal separation, if not a complete divorce. He pleaded, offered to see a marriage counselor, anything to keep this from exploding into public scandal. But Lillian's mind was already made up. She was no longer the naive, hopeful wife who believed everything could be mended with forgiveness. This betrayal, complete with a humiliating invoice, was a line in the sand, and she intended to make Christian and his mistress regret every cent of that $69,000. As dawn broke, Lillian found herself in a dilemma. She didn't want to face this alone, yet she hated the idea of revealing Christian's betrayal to friends or family. It felt too raw, too shameful. But she needed guidance, and so with a heavy heart, she called the one person who would stand by her unconditionally, her old college friend, Rebecca "Becky" Sandoval. Becky was a lawyer specializing in family law, with a stint at the prestigious firm Morgan & Ledbetter. They had remained close since dorm life at Parsons School of Design, bonding over late-night pizza and endless chatter about personal dreams. Becky had always admired Lillian's warmth and creativity, just as Lillian admired Becky's fierce intellect and unwavering loyalty. When Lillian arrived at Becky's Upper West Side apartment, she clutched the incriminating invoice like a damning piece of evidence. Becky's eyes widened as she read the details, her face flushing with indignation. What kind of sociopath demands money from a pregnant wife for entertaining her husband? Becky asked, outraged. Lillian sighed, tears brimming. This is what my life has become. I feel humiliated and lost. I don't want to remain married to him if this is how he treats me. But I also need to protect myself and especially the baby. Becky set aside her coffee mug. I'll help you navigate this. We'll make sure you get what you deserve. Christian is wealthy, and you've invested years of emotional labor and your own funds into this marriage. You should be compensated, especially with a child on the way. Relief flooded Lillian. I've been so afraid. Christian's influence is enormous. The press loves him. I don't want to be seen as some gold digger or a scorned woman looking for revenge. Becky's gaze hardened. Don't you dare blame yourself. If he wants to flaunt his mistress's bills, we'll see how he handles real legal action. Let's prepare for the worst. It might get ugly, but you won't face it alone. With that conversation, Lillian felt a spark of hope. She had an ally, someone who believed in her worth and had the legal chops to fight for it. The next move was to draft a set of divorce terms, so formidable that Tiffany's petty invoice would look like spare change in comparison. Days passed as Becky and Lillian meticulously prepared the divorce papers. They combed through Christian's assets, from his shares in ecotech companies to real estate holdings in Manhattan, London, and even a small vineyard in Napa Valley. It was a painstaking process, but each detail added another brick to Lillian's protective wall. During this time, Christian vacillated between begging forgiveness and lashing out. He bombarded Lillian with frantic calls, alternately promising to end things with Tiffany and accusing Lillian of overreacting. Her silence only fueled his desperation. But the mistress, Tiffany Monroe, had other plans. She was about to make her move, determined to ensure she wasn't dismissed as a fling. One morning, Lillian awoke to a flurry of missed calls from unknown numbers. Confused, she checked her voicemail. Mrs. Westfield, we're reporters from the Daily Chronicle. We'd love a comment on the rumor that your husband might be separating from you for Ms. Monroe. Her heart raced as she realized Tiffany had leaked the affair to the press. Within hours, paparazzi swarmed her townhouse, snapping photos of Lillian with her baby bump, shouting questions about the woman who sent you a bill. Panicked Lillian called Becky, who advised her to stay indoors and not respond publicly. Any statement now could be twisted, Becky cautioned. Let's finalize the divorce terms first. But Tiffany wasn't done. She posted cryptic photos on social media, hinting at a luxurious lifestyle spa visits, helicopter rides, lavish dinners. In one particularly brazen post, she wore a diamond necklace that Lillian recognized as Christian's gift during their first anniversary trip to Paris. The caption read, "When he knows how to keep a woman happy." Lillian's fury threatened to consume her. This woman's audacity was unrelenting. She was not simply content with an affair. She craved publicity, as though flaunting her conquest of a billionaire husband was a twisted badge of honor. While Christian tried to contain the media fallout, Lillian focused on her unborn child. She felt the baby's kicks more frequently. Now a constant reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a secure future, for her little one, free from the toxic betrayal that had marred the family's foundations. The tension surged to a boiling point. If Tiffany thought she could manipulate the narrative and paint Lillian as a hapless victim, she had underestimated the strength and cunning of the woman she had so brazenly provoked. The phone refused to stop ringing. Journalists, bloggers, even former acquaintances looking for gossip. Everyone seemed ravenous for a scoop. Lillian leaned against her kitchen counter, trying to steady her breath. Christian had left frantic messages. "Don't do this, Lillian. We can weather the storm. I'll cut Tiffany out of my life." But a single glance at the black envelope pinned to her fridge reminded her why she couldn't stay silent any longer. She grabbed her keys and left the townhouse escorted by a private security guard Becky had arranged to keep paparazzi at bay. Her destination was the Morgan & Ledbetter law firm, Becky's office, where she would finalize her decision to file for divorce. Once inside Becky's glass-walled conference room, she was greeted by towering stacks of documents. Lillian's chest tightened at the sight. "This is it, then, the official separation," she said. Softly, Becky placed a reassuring hand on Lillian's shoulder. "I know it's overwhelming, but we've made sure every detail is covered: spousal support, child support, property division, you name it." Lillian nodded, flipping through the pages. Her eyes landed on the settlement figure, an amount so staggering it seemed surreal. But as Becky reminded her, Christian's personal fortune had soared into the billions. The sum was only a fraction of his empire, yet more than enough to ensure a comfortable life for Lillian and the baby. "Are you sure you're ready for the media circus this might spark?" Becky asked, her voice gentle. Divorce with these stakes is bound to attract even more attention. Lillian inhaled deeply, recalling the humiliating bill Tiffany had sent. She imagined the quiet life she wanted for her child, free from secrets and humiliations. "I'm ready," she said, signing the necessary forms. With that pen stroke, she severed the bonds that had once been the cornerstone of her love story. No matter the chaos to come, she resolved that her child would never look at her with the sorrow of a mother too fearful to stand up for herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the moment she walked out of that office, she would be Lillian Westfield, soon to be ex-wife of a billionaire and a woman determined to forge a new beginning. The documents lay neatly stacked on Becky's conference room table, a quiet storm bound in crisp legal formatting. Lillian stared at the title page. Draft Westfield versus Westfield Dissolution of Marriage Agreement, and felt her chest tighten with a rush of conflicting emotions. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was about reclaiming her power, securing her child's future, and sending a message to a man who had treated her love as expendable. Becky slid the top page toward her. "It's all here. Everything we discussed. I've made sure no one can accuse you of being vindictive. This is clean, comprehensive, and bulletproof." Together they reviewed the details one more time. The settlement began with the foundation generous spousal maintenance tied to a fixed percentage of Christian's annual earnings, calculated to grow proportionally with the success of the Westfield Fund. Given his billions in holdings and assets, it would ensure Lillian lived not just comfortably, but independently. Child support came next. A secure figure that would be reviewed annually, with adjustments for inflation healthcare costs and private education from kindergarten to Ivy League. Becky had even included contingencies, full coverage for a nanny, prenatal and postnatal care, and a clause that Christian would be legally responsible for any emergency medical expenses for both mother and child, no matter the cost. Then came the trust fund. "Your child," Becky said softly, "will have full access to a multi-million-dollar trust by age 25. You'll manage it as guardian until then. No interference." Lillian nodded, feeling the protective mother in her rising. He won't grow up wondering if he's worthy. Real estate was next. Lillian would retain full ownership of the Boston estate, historic, sprawling and quietly luxurious. It wasn't just property, it was legacy, and she would make sure it became a haven of stability for her child. The Central Park townhouse, their former marital home, would be liquidated. The proceeds would be split, but only after Lillian received a payout for the renovations and interior design work she had done herself. Her own touch, her artistry finally acknowledged as valuable. But perhaps the most telling section of the settlement came in the form of two unusual clauses. The first, profit sharing in the Westfield Fund. Though Christian had always been its public face, Lillian had helped shape its philanthropic identity. Her introductions, her public speaking, her networking in philanthropic circles had brought in over a dozen major investors. Becky argued and documented those contributions in detail. "Every man builds his empire on the back of someone," Becky said. "And you were the one holding him up. Now the world will know it." The second clause was symbolic and cathartic. It was labeled compensatory damages for emotional distress and public humiliation, a direct response to the infamous mistress invoice Tiffany had so boldly sent. Becky tapped the section. $500,000. It won't undo what she did. But it's a message? Lillian didn't smile, but her eyes hardened with clarity. "She sent me a bill," she murmured. "So I'm sending her the invoice she wasn't expecting." At the end of the document, a confidentiality agreement sealed the terms. If Christian or Tiffany leaked any personal details or attempted to slander Lillian's name in the press, the financial penalties would be swift and severe. It was, as Becky put it, the legal equivalent of a velvet hammer. Lillian set down the pen and looked at Becky. "Do you think he'll sign?" Becky leaned back. "He'll fume. He'll curse. But he'll sign. If he doesn't, we take it to court, and Tiffany's antics become courtroom evidence. Christian knows exactly how much he stands to lose." Lillian breathed deeply, her hand resting on her belly. "This isn't about revenge. It's about respect. For myself, for my child." Becky nodded. "Exactly." Without another word, Lillian picked up the pen and signed her name. It was elegant, it was final, and it was worth every dollar. She had entered the fight with her dignity in tatters. Now she was walking out with her name, her future, and $1 million reminder that some women don't break. They build. Christian Westfield stared at the divorce settlement as if it were written in fire. Every clause, every figure, every line item was a monument to the reality he had so carefully tried to avoid. Lillian wasn't bluffing. She wasn't broken. She had turned every ounce of betrayal into strategy, and he was holding the evidence of it in his trembling hands. His office at the Westfield Fund, once a sanctuary of ego and ambition, now felt like a gilded cage. The sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows offered no comfort. The city below, which once bowed to his every whim, now looked indifferent. He grabbed his phone and dialed. Lillian answered on the third ring. Her voice was cool, steady. "You've seen the papers, I assume." "You're out of your mind," Christian snapped. "These demands are insane. Half the Boston estate, a profit share in my hedge fund. You didn't build any of that." "I built your brand," Lillian replied calmly. "I gave speeches, hosted events, introduced you to investors who believed in our shared vision. And I carried your child while your mistress was out shopping with your black card." Christian fell silent. She continued, voice low but firm. I'm done arguing. This is about what I'm owed. What our child is owed. He tried to pivot. I never meant for it to go this far. Tiffany was a mistake. I'll make it right. I'll end it. You ended it the moment you let her send me a bill, she said. Now I'm just collecting what's due. He clenched his jaw. If this goes public, it'll destroy me. Then sign quietly, she answered. Or drag it out and let the world watch. The call ended. Christian hurled the phone across the room. It hit the glass wall with a sharp crack, but didn't shatter just like Lillian. She didn't break. She simply became sharper. He sat back down and ran a hand through his hair. In his mind, she had always been the quiet one. The soft-spoken designer who stood by his side smiled for the cameras and forgave easily. He never expected her to outmaneuver him. He never imagined she would be the one to bring him to his knees. But now, for the first time in his life, Christian Westfield had lost. Not in business, not on paper, but where it mattered most. And Lillian. She had just begun to win. The headlines didn't slow down. If anything, Tiffany Monroe's outrageous behavior at the law firm had poured gasoline on an already raging fire. The press had a field day. Rumors swirled across Manhattan's elite social circuits, mixing fact and fabrication into a sensational cocktail of betrayal scandal and high society drama. Westfield showdown, mistress crashes negotiations. The $69,000 invoice that triggered a $1 million divorce. Pregnant wife shuts down. Mistress mid-tantrum. Bravo. Lillian didn't bother reading most of it. She stayed focused. The settlement was still pending, and Christian's legal team, led by the notoriously aggressive Henry Steinberg, had not backed down. If anything, they were doubling down, working to undermine her role in Christian's empire, attacking her emotional distress claims, and trying to portray her as a woman using pregnancy to secure wealth. It was a ruthless strategy. But Becky had anticipated every move. While Steinberg launched his offensive, Becky went on the defensive, and then the offensive of her own. Through a calculated anonymous leak to a reputable gossip columnist, a key piece of the narrative hit the media like lightning, the original invoice Tiffany had sent to Lillian. Public opinion, which had been somewhat divided, swung sharply in Lillian's favor. The image of a pregnant woman receiving a demand for spa bills and emotional labor from her husband's mistress sent shockwaves through society. Tiffany Monroe quickly became a cautionary tale, lampooned online, mocked on talk shows, and widely seen as a greedy opportunist who had overplayed her hand. She actually sent a bill, one late-night host joked. Was there a line item for betrayal with interest? The media, once circling Lillian like vultures, now began referring to her with a new moniker, the Graceful Storm. But it wasn't just a PR win. Behind the scenes, the damage to Christian's carefully curated public image was substantial. The Westfield Fund, which prided itself on socially responsible investing, was suddenly the subject of investor scrutiny. Several high-profile clients privately reached out to Christian's partners with concerns. Rumors began to surface that certain board members were considering asking him to step down as CEO temporarily, if not permanently. And Christian felt it. For the first time in his professional life, he wasn't in control. In private emails and messages, he vacillated between fury and panic. He texted Lillian several times a day, attempting to spin everything. Let's talk. I didn't expect her to do this. I never meant for you to get dragged into this. I still love you." Lillian never replied. The silence was strategic and empowering. Instead, she met with Becky daily to refine the settlement, adjusting child support to scale with inflation, inserting clauses that would secure access to trust funds for the child, and demanding formal recognition of her contributions to the fund's public image. Every speech you gave Becky reminded her, every gala you hosted, every introduction you made that has value. Don't let them erase that. Christian's team countered. They attempted to settle under the table, offering a smaller figure in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. They framed it as a dignified solution. Lillian saw it for what it was, a final attempt to hush the truth. Her answer was firm. No deal without justice. While her name was being tossed around dinner parties and editorial columns, Lillian stayed grounded. She focused on her health, her baby's well-being, and her own mental clarity. Prenatal yoga calls with her mother and long walks in Riverside Park became her sacred rituals. She journaled often, not about pain, but about resilience. And when news broke that Tiffany Monroe had fled the city, her social media gone dark, her brand in tatters, Lillian didn't celebrate. She simply felt done. Christian's world was imploding. His empire strained under public pressure. His charm, once his strongest weapon, had lost its power. And now, cornered on all sides, he agreed to a final meeting. The room was the same one where Tiffany had once thrown a tantrum. But this time, Lillian was calm, commanding, and utterly unmoved. On one side, Christian and his legal team, their expressions guarded. On the other, Lillian, Becky, and the full weight of truth on their side. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about legacy. And Lillian had no intention of walking away with anything less than everything she and her child deserved. Lillian had expected the legal negotiations to be tense. She had not expected Tiffany Monroe to storm through the doors of the law firm in 5-inch stilettos, a designer handbag clutched in one manicured hand and a folded legal document in the other, like it was a weapon. It was midday, and the conference room was quiet. On one side sat Lillian, Becky, and a composed junior associate. On the other, Christian and his lawyer, Henry Steinberg, who had been carefully reviewing the final draft of the divorce settlement. That delicate calm shattered when the door burst open. "You think you can just erase me?" Tiffany's voice sliced through the air, shrill and furious. Everyone turned. "Tiffany, this is a private." Steinberg began rising from his seat. She ignored him and marched straight to Lillian, her heels clicking with sharp finality. "Mrs. Westfield," she sneered, "you have no idea what's coming. Christian made promises. I was there for him when he needed someone. I deserve to be compensated." Lillian didn't flinch. She sat tall, her baby bump visible beneath her cream-knit dress, her face an unreadable mask of calm. "Compensated?" Lillian asked softly, as though tasting the word. "Yes," Tiffany snapped, waving the letter in her hand. "I have a statement from my lawyer. I've been threatened, silenced, and now you want to walk away with everything? Like I was never part of it." Christian rose, then his expression a mix of panic and disbelief. "Tiffany, stop. We've already talked about this." "You weren't supposed to—" "Oh, I'm done waiting," she snapped at him, turning back to Lillian. "I won't be erased. I was with him for months. While you were playing perfect wife, I was the one keeping him sane. You think you're the victim? Please. This world doesn't reward women who play it safe. It rewards women who fight." Becky stood now, placing herself subtly between Lillian and the raging woman. "You're trespassing Ms. Monroe. And from what I can tell, you've just attempted to issue a demand under threat on record." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Oh, spare me the lawyer routine. You're just mad I spoke first." Lillian slowly stood. Her calm was unnerving. She walked past Becky, past Christian, until she stood directly in front of Tiffany, close enough to see the sweat beading beneath the woman's flawless foundation. "You sent me a bill," Lillian said, voice steady. "For massages, for dinners, for time. You dared to put a price on betrayal and deliver it to the woman carrying his child." Tiffany's lips parted, but no words came. Lillian took a small breath. "Let me make something very clear. You are not owed a cent. You were a willing participant in someone else's marriage. And if Christian promised you something, take it up with him. But you will never again speak to me. Never send me anything. Never show up in my space." Becky chimed in. "If you do, Ms. Monroe will file for harassment and a restraining order." Christian looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Tiffany, leave." Tiffany glared at him. "You're a coward." He didn't argue. Lillian continued, her voice now cool and clear. "You came here today to prove something. But all you did was confirm what I already knew. You're not a threat. You're noise. And I no longer listen to noise." Tiffany's confidence cracked. She turned to Christian one last time. "Don't think this is over." Then she stormed out, the echo of her heels fading down the hallway. For a long moment, the room was still. Then Becky let out a slow exhale. "Well, that saves us a subpoena." Lillian sat back down and glanced at Christian. He couldn't meet her eyes. The mistress had shown her cards and folded. Lillian, meanwhile, had just proven to everyone in that room that there was only one woman worthy of the Westfield name, and she had no intention of giving it up quietly. The hospital room was unnervingly quiet. Machines beeped, steadily monitoring Lillian and the baby as nurses came and went in soft-soled shoes. Christian sat in the corner watching her sleep. He looked smaller now, his usual commanding presence wilted under guilt and exhaustion. The bags under his eyes weren't from stress alone, they were from shame. Earlier that morning, a new test had revealed complications with Lillian's pregnancy. Though the baby's vitals were stable, doctors warned of heightened risk. "Bed rest is crucial," the specialist had said firmly, "and minimal emotional stress. You're both strong, but your body needs protection now more than ever." Lillian had nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. She wasn't scared of pain. She had lived with worse. But the possibility of losing her child because of Christian's betrayal, that thought was unbearable. Christian had lingered at her bedside all day, offering water-fluffing pillows, whispering apologies. Lillian didn't trust any of it. Still, she allowed him to stay, not out of forgiveness, but because she wanted answers. As dusk fell and the baby's heartbeat echoed gently in the background, she finally asked why her. Christian hesitated. She turned her head slowly to face him. No more deflections. No more PR statements. "I deserve to know." He looked away for a long moment, then took a slow breath. "It wasn't love," he began. Voice brittle. It wasn't even lust at first. It was leverage. Lillian's brow furrowed. Christian swallowed hard. "Tiffany." She was connected to a group of potential investors. Old money, European banking families. One of them wanted Favors' introductions visibility. Tiffany offered access. She played her role, I played mine. You used her. To close deals? Lillian asked, horrified. He nodded miserably. At first, yes. Then she got comfortable. She wanted more. I didn't stop it. I thought I could control it, contain it. Lillian's hand trembled slightly as she touched her belly. And me. What was I? A prop for your public image? No, he said quickly, standing. Never. You were the only real thing in my life. I know that now. But you didn't know it then, she replied flatly. Not when you let your mistress invoice me. Not when you lied. Not when you put our child at risk. He couldn't meet her eyes. I thought I married a man with vision, she said, softly, tears welling but not falling. Instead, I married someone who sold his soul for quarterly gains. Christian moved closer. Lillian, I'm so sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. She looked at him weary, but unwavering. You can't undo this, but you can stay out of my way while I protect what you nearly destroyed. That night, as Christian left the room, shoulders slumped under the weight of his own undoing, Lillian reached for the small ultrasound photo taped beside her bed. She ran her fingers over the black and white blur of her baby's tiny face. I'll do better, she whispered to her unborn child. For both of us. The betrayal was complete, but so was her resolve. The week Lillian spent in the hospital passed in a haze of fluorescent lights, whispered check-ins, and quiet determination. Her condition had stabilized, the baby was strong, and doctors were optimistic. But emotionally, Lillian was still reeling, not from fear of the future, but from finally accepting the irrevocable truth her marriage to Christian was over. Christian visited often. He brought flowers, asked about the baby, and hovered like a man trying to rewind a clock already broken. But Lillian no longer softened at his gestures. She spoke to him kindly but distantly, the tone of a woman who had drawn a line and refused to cross it again. You made your choices, she told him during one of his visits. Now I'm making mine. While Lillian recovered, Becky worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The updated divorce terms were not just strategic, they were airtight. Every clause protected Lillian's physical health, emotional well-being, and financial future. Any further medical care or complications from the pregnancy would be covered in full. The child support agreement wasn't just generous. It was indexed to Christian's investment growth and protected from fluctuation. A separate education fund would guarantee the child access to top institutions, no matter what scandals might affect the Westfield name in the years ahead. Christian's legal team reviewed the documents in tense silence. They knew they had no leverage left. His mistress had imploded their case with one reckless outburst. His reputation, though salvaged publicly with a carefully crafted press release, was in tatters behind closed doors. Investors were uneasy. Board members had whispered about voting him out. And Lillian, graceful as ever, had won without ever stepping into the mud. With quiet reluctance, Christian signed. No outburst, no final attempt at persuasion. Just the scratch of pen on paper, the official end of the marriage he had ruined. The following afternoon, Lillian was released from the hospital. Her steps were slow, cautious, but every movement radiated purpose. Paparazzi waited outside the private entrance. She walked past them calmly, sunglasses on a protective hand resting on her baby bump. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any headline ever could. A car arranged by Becky whisked her away, not to the townhouse she once shared with Christian, but to a sleek, sunlit condo in Tribeca one Lillian had secured under her own name. The space was modern and warm, designed by one of her former protégés and gifted to her as a gesture of solidarity. As she stepped inside, something in her exhaled. Not relief, not triumph. Freedom. There were still boxes to unpack, nursery plans to finalize, and 1,000 small tasks to prepare for motherhood. But for the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt weightless. Her name was hers again, her space, her future. In the weeks that followed, the media cycle shifted. Tiffany Monroe, once smug and calculating, faded from the spotlight. Her attempt to provoke Lillian into public humiliation had backfired spectacularly. After her tantrum at the law firm and failed attempt at extortion, no outlet wanted to hear her side. She had become a punchline, not a headline. Christian maintained a dignified silence, releasing a statement that read, "After careful reflection, Ms. Westfield and I have decided to part ways amicably. I remain committed to supporting her and our child with the utmost respect and privacy." But Lillian didn't need his words. She had everything she needed: her own business, her child, and a renewed sense of who she was. She resumed design work, slowly starting with remote consultations and vision boards. Her first client post-settlement was a new wellness retreat in upstate New York. The space, she decided, would be built on themes of renewal, balance, and quiet strength. In a way, it mirrored her own rebirth. Her friends returned, some with apologies for not seeing the cracks, sooner others simply offering support without explanation. Lillian welcomed them with open arms. She had no energy for bitterness, only forward momentum. In late spring, she stood in the condo's living room, a glass of herbal tea in hand, sunlight streaming across the hardwood floor. Her baby kicked softly beneath her dress, a small reminder of all she had fought for. She smiled not at the world, not at a camera, but at herself. She had not only survived betrayal, she had transformed it. The mistress had sent her a bill. But Lillian, she sent back divorce terms worth millions, and in the process she secured something even more valuable: peace. Lillian's journey reminds us that betrayal, no matter how deep, can be a powerful catalyst for rediscovering our own worth. She turned a humiliating demand from her husband's mistress into an opportunity to secure the future for herself and her child. In doing so, she proved that resilience and self-respect can outweigh even the grandest illusions of wealth and status. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of secrets, scandal, and redemption. If you found Lillian's story inspiring, or if it made your blood boil, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more gripping tales to life. And remember, sometimes the darkest moments can lead us to the brightest new beginnings. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never underestimate the power of self-worth.